All right, welcome back, everyone. It's now my pleasure to reintroduce you to Professor Sharon Parker, who is the chair of our third panel for the day. Over to you, Sharon.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. Welcome back after lunch. Thank you for coming back, first of all. Welcome to our session on human technology interactions. So I think a comment was just made to me that the first session was very broad. The second session went down a little deeper, and I think you'll find that we are probably going to go even deeper into some specific challenges. So if we could have the first slide up that shows who's in the session, that would be terrific. Technology people. Oh, can you do it, Eva? Thank you. Yes, so just the next one. Thank you. Yes, so this is who is going to be speaking in this session. So I'm actually going to speak. So I noticed that all the other chairs didn't actually do a speech. So now I'm thinking I made a bit of a misjudgment there because I could have just been relaxing and asking questions. But I will also speak. I'm from Curtin University. You can see Professor Eva Kyndt will speak from Swinburne University. You can see our disciplines up there. So we come from some diverse disciplines, but all social science. Then we have Professor Nicole Gillespie from the University of Queensland, who is, I put management, I'm not sure if that's quite right yet, but it's good enough. And then we also have Professor Minna Ruckenstein, who I couldn't quite grasp your discipline, actually, Minna, and I didn't get time to ask you, but anthropology, consumer, something. You can explain when you do your presentation. Thank you. And if we can just go to the next slide, please. So the plan for our session, we actually have some slides. So I'm not sure if this is a disciplinary difference, but it never occurred to me that there wouldn't be slides, actually. So what we would do is Minna is going to talk, first of all, fairly broadly about the idea of humanising technology, and she'll explain what she means by that. And then, as I say, we're going to delve deeply into three specific ways, I guess, of humanising technology. So first we'll go to Nicole, who'll talk about trust and when we trust in AI and when we don't. We'll go to Eva, who'll talk about skills and learning. And then finally, I will give a sort of work design perspective. I think that our session dovetails really nicely with many of the previous talks, but I was really struck especially by Joy Demuzi talking about, with the prior industrial revolutions, how much of an implication that they had for work. And that's really, I guess, a core theme that we have today, is really looking at what are some of those implications for work. So without further ado, I would love to introduce Minna, who's going to talk a little bit about humanising technology.
Thank you, and thank you for the opportunity to be here. I feel like I'm really learning a lot because I'm getting the Australian perspective to the digital society. So I'm from Finland, and I was trained as an anthropologist, but I have kind of drifted into this interdisciplinary space, and I was very happy that in the first session this was kind of reframed to me that this is a disciplinary process. So I'm moving perhaps into a new discipline where I'm not quite yet. So calls for post-humanist and more than human perspective have been voiced over social sciences and humanities. But in our group, we actually still think that the human is a very critical component of many things that are happening. So we have a very human-centric perspective to the digital. And I'll just mention some of the projects that I work with now, so you get a bit of sense of how we think about the human. I lead a multidisciplinary repair consortium, which is an interdisciplinary consortium where we look at local algorithmic systems. And when I talk about algorithmic systems, I'm talking about constellations of people and code. So it could be anything from a patient record system to hate speech detection mechanisms in social media. So we look at very different kinds of algorithmic systems in different fields, from energy to insurance to health, and we're trying to understand why these systems break or they produce breakages, and we think about breakages them not working properly, but we also think about epistemological breakages, how these systems are pushing something that we value in life and cause these kind of epistemological breakages. It could be also breakages in terms of workflows and things like that. So, and then we think about how repair work is happening and whether some of these systems are actually beyond repair, that we need to actually renew our thinking about these systems. I also have a European Commission-funded project that looks at these developments in different European countries. And again, we try to look across fields to see a little bit better what the automation logics are actually doing in different fields. And of course, different fields have different kinds of regulations. So for instance, in the media field, there hasn't been very much regulatory pushback. But in insurance field, for instance, there's a lot. So regulation is a very complex thing in this space as well. And then I have an everyday AI project that started because I was very concerned how stereotypical our ideas were about China and the digital. So I wanted to have a small group of people looking at this development on the ground in Hangzhou and in Shanghai. So we argue that people are critical agents in terms of socio-technical transformations and human-machine relations. And by now we know that algorithmically powered technologies, and why the algorithmic is important here is important because it produces certain kinds of feedback loops. Algorithmic systems try to steer behavior, try to do things that act on us, and then we act on these systems. So it's dynamic in that sense. So so we know that these systems are not very good at detecting life or living beings, and I thought I'll just give you this somewhat exceptional happening. Robot mistakes man for a box of peppers, but it's logical to the robot because the man is there, so why wouldn't it be a package? So the idea is that the robot doesn't do any mistakes, it just operates as the robot does. So we rehumanize in our project. And what do we mean by rehumanizing? We mean that we look at humans as regulators, innovators, practitioners who do something with these algorithmically mediated technologies and algorithmically mediated world making. So we challenge the notion that machines could or should work autonomously. They work automatically, but not necessarily autonomously. And we tend to avoid the term artificial intelligence because it kind of ascribes these mechanical power as if it could operate without human involvement. So in all of our projects, we actually show that AI is very much human-produced. So it's very natural for us to actually humanize machines. The robot kills, but it doesn't really kill. It just does what a robot does. So this also raises an interesting tension in our work. While we rehumanize the tech, we also need to dehumanize it. Our language is full of humanization of tech. We think that AI hallucinates. It doesn't hallucinate, it just calculates. Chinese talk about artificial intelligence as human-made intelligence. In some ways, it's a better term. Rehumanizing technical systems is, of course, not a new endeavor. Lucy Suchman was doing it in the 80s in her book, Plans and Situated Actions, and the subtitle of the book is The Problem of Human-Machine Communication, and it definitely hasn't disappeared since the 80s. And also Alone Together by Sherry Turkle is a good example of rehumanizing. So this thread has been there in studies of technologies, but what we are arguing is that it's not new, but it's needed with ever-increasing urgency because algorithms have kind of drifted from the computational realm to shape the everyday, to shape media, to shape urban planning, to shape education. And we have various kinds of everyday things that actually do decisions, credit scoring, hiring practices, student examinations. It's everywhere. ChatGPT and large language models, which are now kind of associated with AI, people often talk about AI now as it would only be those. They have intensified some of the ways that we need to think about human-machine communication and the way we interact with machines. So, amidst all of this, research that seeks to understand how people envision, experience, interact, and live with algorithmic systems is much needed, and it's becoming more established. So there's quite a few books out there who are trying to look at these things from different perspectives, and the power aspect also. We have talked a lot today about the tech bros and the whole kind of like platform economy. So it's there. And we have to somehow take that also into account. So Taina Bucher talks about algorithmic imaginations. Cheney Lippold talks about how we are all data now. And in our book with Sarah Pink, we look at everyday automation in different spheres. And Susanna Parsonen tries to understand why are we bored in social media, even if we are so addicted to it. So with these kinds of framings, I think what is very interesting is that tech futures, they require constant human efforts to become what they end up being. So the future question is actually also a matter of feelings, which I argue in my book that just came out. So here I'm saying that when we think that we need to promote tech, there's actually a lot of feel to it, because we feel that that's the future that we need to latch on. And it's not a trivial thing. We think of hype as being trivial, but it's not trivial at all. So when tracing the feeling of algorithms, I was very interested in what technologies demand from us, what kind of care we need to give to these technologies so that they would function, but also what we would like these technologies to do for us. So we study what we call bottom-up imaginaries. I don't have time to go in there.
You've got 1 minute.
I have 1 minute, okay. So bottom-up imaginaries are imaginaries that people who are made to use some AI systems, for instance. We've looked at social workers, for instance, who had to use risk prediction systems that didn't work at all. These people also have ideas how they think that tech could be possible for them to use in a way that would actually support their work. So when it comes to tech, I'd like to refer to Sarah Pink's book, who is saying that we're all kind of at the edge of technologies, edge of future with technology. So it really matters how we research these things and how we think about these things, what kind of futures we're going to end up having. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Minna. We're next going to go straight to Nicole, and then after we've had 2 talks, I'm going to take some questions, because I don't know if you guys are like me, but if you have 4 and then have questions, I can't remember the first one. So we're just going to do 2 and then 2. So thank you very much, Minna. We'll come back to you soon, and over to you, Nicole.
Thanks very much, Sharon. Hello, everyone. It's great to be here, and thanks for sticking around for the afternoon. So I'm going to bring a trust perspective to the conversation today, particularly focusing on trust in AI, although perhaps I shouldn't use the term AI, but I will for this presentation. For AI to be responsibly used in both work and society, it needs to be both trustworthy and appropriately trusted, coming to this notion of well-calibrated trust. So our level of trust needs to be well-calibrated with the actual trustworthiness of the technology. So we know that trust drives acceptance and adoption. However, it's really important to not take a simplistic approach and think that more trust in technology is a good thing. Low trust or distrust is very functional when the technology is not capable or has capability limitations, or where it's not being used for benevolent purposes, for example. And when we overtrust AI, we can see that harm arises, unintentional consequences, bias, unfair treatment, reputational loss. These are just some of the examples. You'll be familiar with many of them. A really recent one, just from earlier this month, was when academics relied on generative AI to identify cases of wrongdoing by firms to put forward in a parliamentary submission. And actually, of course, they were hallucinated. Again, probably shouldn't use that term, but there was no factual basis to these cases. So really, really, I think, troubling when academics are doing this. Okay, so do people trust AI? Is our trust well calibrated? This is a question which is, of course, hard to answer, but one way that we tried to tackle this was to do a very large survey, so over 17,000 people across 17 countries using nationally representative sampling. And what we find from that, very simplistically, is that 61% of people say that they basically have low trust in AI. They're either unwilling to trust the AI systems or they're ambivalent in their use. Now, we looked at this across a range of different AI applications and purposes. Of course, our trust is to some extent dependent on the purpose of the AI, so what it's being used for, its application. An example of this is we find that people are more trusting of AI use in healthcare, so to support diagnosis and treatment, than they are, say, in AI use in HR circumstances, where it's being used for like screening resumes and selecting. Okay, now I would argue that this low level of trust is actually pretty well founded and well calibrated when you take the psychology of people around AI. So the majority of people are concerned about the risks of AI. I think all of us in this room probably share this. You can see here that particular concerns are around cybersecurity risks, privacy risks, manipulation and harmful use, job loss, de-skilling. These would probably be familiar to you as well. We looked at benefits. People do see the benefits of AI, but they perceive that the risks of AI often outweigh the benefits, particularly in Western countries. We see that that's certainly the case. This is across all different samples. Okay, I'll also just say that in terms of well-calibrated trust, most people say that they don't understand AI or when and how it's being used. So again, I think this low level of trust is well calibrated. And also people say, the majority of people say that they feel that the future of AI in terms of its impact on society is unpredictable and uncertain. So again, good reason to question trust. We also asked about trust in the workplace, and we find that about half of people say that they're prepared to trust AI in terms of relying on the recommendations and outputs for work purposes, as well as for sharing data or information to make these systems work. But we find that people are more comfortable with AI when it's being used to either augment tasks or automate routine tasks, back-end functions. They're less comfortable when the AI is exerting some sort of control over them, for example, in HR and people management purposes. Now, there are demographic differences. Managers are more accepting, more willing to trust, more supportive of AI use in the workplace. And given that managers are the ones that deploy these technologies, that could create tensions in the workplace and already is. We also find that younger generations and the university educated are more trusting and comfortable and more willing and actually are using AI more in the workplace. Just going a little bit deeper here in terms of preferences around AI. So we find that people actually are really open to the idea of AI being used in managerial decision making. However, the preference is for either a 75-25% human AI collaboration or a 50-50. And again, in Western countries, it springs more towards humans retaining the balance of control there. Now, we've heard throughout the day about the concerns around job loss. I thought this was interesting to see that 40% of people, again, that we sampled across these countries, believe that AI will replace jobs in their specific work area as well as tasks in their work area. And 75% report, just concerns about job loss and de-skilling more broadly in society. So we looked at these sort of, I guess, to drill further down into these challenges around trusting AI. We identified 6 key trust challenges that are either unique or are exacerbated by the features of AI. So how do we identify these? Well, this is based on a systematic review of the literature on trust in AI. It's also informed by our qualitative study of 8 cases of AI use in public sector organisations. So that was based on over 90 interviews over an 18-month period. These aren't exhaustive, but what they really highlight, I think, are that there's tensions and paradoxes in addressing the trust challenges. Obviously, accuracy and reliability is really central to trusting. That's what the research shows. But the dirty secret about AI is, of course, it's never 100% accurate. We know that that leads to a whole lot of problems when it is inaccurate. And it's more accurate for certain conditions, certain groups. It can be optimised in different ways to give different accuracy outcomes. A concern is that it's the perception of accuracy that drives trust more than the objectiveness of actual objective reality of the accuracy. But on a positive note, providing accuracy metrics to people when they're using AI can help them to be more well calibrated in their trust. Now, AI is often talked about in terms of being a black box, and we know that one of the challenges from a trust perspective is, how do we know how it's working? How do we know how it arrived at its outcomes? Now, the research shows that transparency and explainability do enhance trust, and they can also support well-calibrated trust by helping people to understand the limitations around the technology. Yet explanations can also be manipulative. They can and often do lead to over-trust in the technologies. And transparency can also enable gaming of the system. The ATO are really concerned about saying too much about their algorithmic use because they're worried people will game the system. There's also an inherent tension that the most accurate models are often the ones that have the deepest levels of learning, but then they're also the least explainable. So there's all these inherent tensions here. Now, for AI models to work well, they of course need to rely on very large data sets. And I think Zuboff's work in this area where she talks about mass data extraction being different to prior forms of market exchange. It's often one way, it's often non-reciprocal, it's often not consensual. And certainly we've seen with generative AI a whole lot of concerns and legal cases, lawsuits around data being taken without consent. We do know from the research that providing reassurances and protections around privacy and security do enhance trust. That's a good thing. I think that we should be getting to the point where these need to be provided and are expected to be provided. But again, there's the tensions here. So the most high quality and sometimes the most trusted services are the ones that are highly personalised, drawing on a lot of personal information, yet they of course open up risk of manipulation and risk of privacy breaches. And I think people's concerns around this are really real. One study showed that tailored persuasive appeals to consumers based on their psychological profile increases clicks on ads by 40% and purchases by 50%. Okay, we've talked a bit about automation and augmentation. Again, there's a lot of pressure on organisations to automate, to save costs, etc. But it does open up all those vulnerabilities. And I think it also, certainly we saw in our data, the concerns around dehumanising services, particularly public services. And also research shows that there's a risk of automation bias where even skilled professionals, even doctors, will start to override their own judgments when an AI is offering a different perspective. So there's a whole lot of really interesting work there going on about how we provide, how AI interfaces with humans to try to avoid over-reliance. Okay, so in general, the research shows that people have a very strong preference for augmentation approaches that position AI more as an assistant, and also, really an avoidance or an aversion towards automated systems that exert that kind of control over them. And having a human in the loop, whether it's the user or another human in the loop, certainly does enhance trust. Now, anthropomorphism was touched on by Minna, and this is an important area for trust research as well, because making the AI more human-like, whether it's voice, appearance, interactions, gestures, it can enhance trust. Unfortunately, it can also do this in a manipulative way. It can lead to oversharing. It can steer people to inappropriate decisions. And there's an underlying concern that the influence that anthropomorphic AI may have on people is more based on the emotional connection rather than on its actual capabilities. Another challenge here is around how do we ensure that the governance and regulatory and legal frameworks are in place to provide the appropriate safeguards around AI and to constrain use. And in that way, the rapid pace of AI really does challenge that sort of regulatory lag. So just to close off on I hope a little bit more of a positive note here, from our case study work, we identify a range of practices and capabilities that support both the trustworthy use of AI as well as a more well-calibrated trust. And in particular here, I'd like to highlight, I think, very clear emerging best practice around how AI can be integrated into work. I think the robo-debt case really highlights just how important it is at the very outset of creating AI for it to have a human-centred beneficial purpose. Co-creation is seen as essential, and co-creation that involves impacted stakeholders, obviously human oversight and involvement, having clear contestability processes, and also staging deployment and enabling learning and feedback loops to be occurring before sort of mass distribution or use of these types of technologies. Okay, I think I'll leave it there. I'm probably out of time, am I?
Thank you, yes. Thank you very much, Nicole. So we're going to pause here and I'll open up the floor to questions, but I'll just kick off while everyone is thinking about a question. I think both of you touched on the central notion of autonomy. I think, Minna, you commented that we shouldn't really even be aspiring to have fully autonomous machines. And Nicole, your research highlighted that people don't want to give up that autonomy. And yet we have organisations and technology designers who are trying to create autonomous technology. So can you comment a little bit more, Minna, on why you made that statement and what you guys see as a way forward with this tension?
Yeah, so of course, all my research is on algorithmic systems which have some sort of like human element to them. I don't mind if in a factory machines talk to each other in a kind of autonomous way, but with the kind of resistance to think about autonomous vehicles, for instance. In our research, we think it's important to try to uncover the human that we don't see anymore. So I'll give you an example. I don't know how many of you know that ChatGPT has been trained by Kenyan workers. Data labor is something that AI systems need, and this labor is mainly in the global south. So there are, I think, millions already who do this type of work. So not talking about learning systems without understanding that there's somebody that has taught those learning systems to learn, I think is important. So that's basically what we mean by non-autonomous systems.
Thanks, Minna. Nicole?
Yeah, I mean, I think the whole idea of retaining human autonomy in work is really important, and it does come back. I'm looking forward to your presentation because I think a lot of that does work. It depends on how the work is being designed and where humans are in the loop. When you look at a lot of cases of AI failures, often it is because humans have been really excluded. Certainly, we did a case study of robo-debt before the Royal Commission, actually, and published that with colleagues at University of Queensland, and one of the real key elements of that was just how disempowered the workers were in the process, and how that contributed not only to their own distress but also their inability to be able to really meaningfully respond to citizens who were obviously negatively impacted, very vulnerable people. So I think in terms of how we're integrating these technologies into the workplace, we really do need to think about how are we maintaining that autonomy that people have, and certainly that can be done. I mean, I'm more on the AI optimist side. I think it's just that we've got to work through these challenges. The bit that's always really difficult is when it's being used in more, manipulative, malevolent kind of purposes. I mean, in that way, then often they will focus on trying to minimise any sort of human involvement or human in the loop because that empowers them to be able to create, achieve their malevolent outcomes.
Thank you, Nicole. And actually also there's a big accountability issue too, which is if the machine is fully autonomous, who is accountable when it goes wrong? And that's been an issue with self-driving cars. But we'll see that in the workplace too, for sure. I believe there's a question, Greg, right at the back.
Well, thank you very much for really interesting and important discussion. And either any of the panel members, but perhaps particularly Nicole, I wonder if you might like to elaborate on your insights into the use of AI by HR managers. Some of our research infers that HR managers are using AI in covert ways to generate metrics and monitor workers, even, dare I say, in universities. And some of the big tech firms are using these sorts of metrics to decide who to hire, who to fire, who to promote, and so on. Some of them are obliged to get rid of a certain percentage of their workforce every year. The people who are below average. There's this kind of mantra that some of the big tech firms are using. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, it's just so concerning, and I just find it so surprising because I guess my vision, if we're talking about futures, is that we actually manage to integrate these technologies in a way which it has a social license to operate. People are willing to trust them and accept them. And it's quite complicated. It's not just trusting the technology, right? It's trusting how are we using this technology. Any technology can be used for good or bad. And I almost feel like we're at this like really early stage of maturity. It's like a new toy, and it's like, well, what can we do with this new toy? And almost like we're putting our ethics to one side. I mean, I just find it completely unacceptable, the whole idea of people being monitored and that surveillance in the workplace without their knowledge, without transparency about it. So I think it goes back. And I think what I would like to see is like people who are implementing these technologies in this way go, well, if you're doing it in that way, it will not be trusted, and it will only be a matter of time before there's going to be some sort of uprising or revolution of people saying this isn't okay and we oppose this, as long as we retain some power as employees. So it comes back to probably unionisation and other things. Yeah.
Thanks, Nicole.
Thank
Anyone
you.
else? Eva?
Yeah, I've had a PhD student that looked at HR and using like automated skills-based analysis tools, and whether or not they liked it. They did not like it. And a lot of comment that came back is like, where's the human? We're human resources, where's the human? But another comment that was made was, what does this data actually mean? Like when you're looking at skills, the fact that someone clicked here and there and this and there, and then had a look there and stopped 5 minutes on this page, what does that actually mean for how people are doing their roles and their jobs? So it's definitely a tricky point there. I also do a lot of work on social networks and organizations, and we always suggest to do a survey, so to collect active network data. And we always get, yeah, but we have email data, we have Teams, we have Microsoft Viva, and the question I always pose, yeah, but what does that mean? If we're talking about human skills, especially, or skills more generally, what does it mean? What are we actually measuring? So it comes back to the validity of the data as well.
Thank you. Minna?
This is actually a very old social science problem. What do we do with standards? What do we do with metrics? So now these metrics are just being multiplying, not only in HR but in many other places as well. So it's this kind of legibility logic which then creates self-fulfilling prophecies, because people start doing what is being measured. So I think there's nice work in sociology of numbers and sociology of quantification and in anthropology that can be remobilized to look at this question now.
Thank you, Minna. I also think it comes back to Dirk's earlier point about what's invisible. And so much of the bad stuff in organisations we just accept, and it's invisible almost. And in some ways the technology is just actually ramping it up more, but it's existed before technology. So I have a question at the back, and then love to come, then there's one there. So question at the back first.
Yeah, thank you. This is a fascinating session. We saw with Cambridge Analytica that not everyone is good, and there is likely to be people doing things that are bad. And AC Grayling has just been in Perth actually and did a talk on why AI could be humans' last invention. I just wonder whether you'd like to comment on that, talking about autonomy.
Minna, go.
Yeah, so of course Cambridge Analytica was just the tip of the iceberg. This is being done, we are being experimenting on, we're kind of in a global living lab with these technologies. But still the idea of generative AI coming and somehow, invading our humanity, it just doesn't fly very well with me, because I think that people who are promoting these kinds of visions, they are often also benefiting from them in some way or another. It might even be a distraction that, we are not seeing something more mundane that is taking place when we are engaging up with these pessimist dystopian visions.
Thank you, Minna. I'll leave it there, and let's go. We'll have two more questions, and then we'll move on with our other presentations. So at the back first.
Kiitos, Minna. The Nordic countries and the Finns in particular have had a good reputation in terms of job design and integrating technology with human aspects. Is there a particular learning, I think, that we can take from the Finnish experience?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we have in Nordic countries which makes it much more easier for us to implement these well is the trust between government and citizens. But I think it's also a moment for us where we need to be really proactive, because it's very, very easy to destroy that trust with these technologies because they have surveying aspects. So they're paradoxical in a sense that they can care for the citizens, but they can also punish the citizens. So how to work with that balance right is a really tricky question, and we have been able to do that well in terms of national broadcasting company and in terms of taxation. But then we have some other areas, like for instance, in the social care area, patient record system that was really, really bad. So that's also one of the reasons why I do my research, because I want to. I'm not in the optimist camp or in the pessimist camp. I'm kind of in the paradoxical camp, that these can be good and bad, and they are often at the same time. You know, every digital system is also, it excludes somebody, so it's always bad for somebody. So that's also something that we need to think about.
Thank you, Minna. And I think I'd just add to that also the work council system that is in the Nordic countries has created a lot more influence of, you know, the representation of worker voice, I think, is more embedded into the national regimes, etc., which I think is also part of the trust of the managers and the workers. You were talking more generally. Did you want to comment?
Yeah, I think also because Finland was one of the countries in our sample, and it's interesting that they've got the lowest trust in AI, but also one of the highest levels of knowledge of AI, and they did invest a lot in public literacy around the elements of AI program, and so it's an interesting profile that they have.
Thank you. We'll have one last question at the front, and then we will have you, Eva.
You probably don't need this, but I'm just trying to, in my own mind, put together some themes. I mean, we began with Joy's presentation on the industrial revolutions, and I suppose evoking the great kind of useful name, concept, interpretation here of Marx. I suppose I've been thinking, as we've been going along, about historical processes and about historical preconditions. Jo, in the previous session, evoked Michel Foucault and the whole question of the conditions of possibility for the technologies that we use. Up until this point, I've been thinking about our discussion heading in terms of what does digitisation, AI do to our politics. But I suppose the robo-debt example throws up somebody used that technology to achieve preconceived political objectives. It was a tool. It's not that the digitisation AI generated a new political possibility or its own political possibility. It made a particular political agenda possible. And I think that's just in terms of my own stock taking at this point. I think, what does AI do to our politics? But what politics uses AI, I think, is a really important point to register here.
Thank you. Nicole, did you want to comment on that in relation to robo-debt?
I mean, I think that's where I just get really concerned, right? Because, we have made huge headway. You know, we've got assurance models in place. New South Wales had one. It's really cleaning up and I think giving a really good way for the public sector to use AI to avoid any of those problems that's getting rolled out across Australia or the states. So there's a lot of good things that are happening. But I always just come back to the point, well, there'll always be people that want to use it for malevolent purposes and just they bypass. I mean, even in robo-debt, they bypass their own digital transformation. Even they ignored their own best practice. And I think that's where, particularly when we go to other, overseas countries that perhaps don't have democracies, and you kind of think, well, how they're implementing it when there aren't these safeguards at all, or these learning mechanisms over time that, correction of governance mechanisms, and that I really worry about that.
Thank you.
So we could, go back to Langdon Winner, 1980. Autonomous technologies, how does it continue? Out of control? What is it? How does it continue? I don't remember, but tech is never neutral. Tech is always political and ideological. So it can be used. It can either shape politics, as exactly like you said, and it's shaped by politics, and that makes it tricky because AI in Finland is not the same as AI in China or AI in Israel or AI in Australia. So the society shapes the AI to be something, and that's also, I think that's why we also need multi-sided comparative research. What happens to these technologies when they travel from place to place, to understand what the politics actually are, what are the ideologies that are being kind of smuggled in with tech, and yeah.
Thanks, Minna. And I think we can come back to that, how you can look at this lens at a national level, you know, an organisational level, an individual level. And I think it's something like technology is not good nor bad, but neither is it neutral, or something like that. Someone can probably do it properly. But that's a great way to end. So I'm going to hand on now to Eva, who's going to also share some research that she's been doing on this topic. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Sharon. So I'm going to do what every good academic does and bring it back to her area of expertise, where I'm comfortable talking, which is all about skills and learning and lifelong learning. And then going on the meme, in God we trust, all others bring data. This is a critical audience, so I brought some data. So we did a descriptive survey study in August, so rather fresh data for Australian work. So about 2,000 of them, variety of industries, and we weighted the results so that the proportions of our sample would also match the Australian workforce. That being said, it's a very descriptive study, and it's a bit of a jump-off point for a couple of points that I want to make. But we talked about the prior industrial revolutions, and every time there's new technology development, it impacts on what people do at work, which tasks they are still doing, which ones they are not doing, which means there will be this element of reskilling and going forward. And what we've traditionally seen is that when that happens, it's mainly those in more practice-oriented jobs, because I hate the term low-skilled workers. It's usually typically more skilled in very practical and practice-oriented jobs. But you do see these trapped for them. So they tend to go into industries that are more vulnerable to that automation. They then go into the jobs that change. However, they're also often the groups of employees that don't get a lot of support from their organizations. There's a lot less investment in their learning because their organizations believe there's lower ROI because typically these students haven't had the best educational experiences. And so you see this cycle going on. They're in this vulnerable position, they end up in these jobs, lower investment, lower self-efficacy on their side, hence they get transferred into other jobs who are again more vulnerable. So there was a very typical thing with every type of technology or automation that found its way to the workflow, basically. However, comes in Gen AI, and also learned that I shouldn't be using AI as a term, but still, that's how everybody knows it. And we're seeing that this piece of technology is actually impacting knowledge workers, and maybe even more than those people that have these more practical and practice-oriented jobs. So we're seeing it at every level and the different types of tasks finding its way, and it's a new reality for knowledge workers. So being an optimist at this point in time, because I might change, it might actually be good news. It might actually, for once, not affect those groups that have already been through the ringer a couple of times. But as I said, I might get back to this one. Because if we then look at how often are people reporting that they're using this technology in their job, and we're seeing that actually about 27%, we've labeled them as high-frequency users. They use it on a daily basis or a couple times in every week. But there's also still a big group, 44%, who says, oh, actually, I don't use it. And delving a little bit further into the perception of these two groups, so we see that it's actually a bit of a widening gap. So people that have started using it early on just keep on expanding their usage. So they use it for one task. Oh, this works. I'll go up into the next task, etc. While non-users obviously continue to be non-users and are a bit more difficult to convince to start using it. So then looking at their perceptions, these high-frequency users are also a lot more optimistic. That's also why they keep on investing in it, because they feel that they are more productive. They feel that the quality of the work they're delivering is higher. They have fewer repetitive tasks and more time for those critical, complex tasks. And the study from the BCG with Harvard and Wharton School was already referenced today, and there's also a little bit of experimental data showing that there's a bit of skills leveling going on. So people that were not as good at the job or at the task are now actually catching up, which is another topic that a PhD student of Sharon and mine will explore in the near future. So there's all these elements going on, and we also found that when we have proactive measures to actually stimulate these non-users to users, we might actually start bridging that gap a little bit. And as I said, as any good academic, formal training helps. So when organizations are investing in and are educating their workers, it's actually a lot more likely that they'll become a high-frequency user in comparison with being self-taught or going on to the internet, which kind of goes against my forte because I really like informal learning, but in this case, probably also because it's new and it's within this organizational context, we do see that training can make a difference here. But then if we looked a little bit deeper on who those high-frequency users were, they were typically university-educated and young. That's the group that was also doing well with the former technological evolutions. So we had this disbalance between groups of workers. We're now seeing a new disbalance, but actually this new disbalance is starting to look awfully similar to the ones we already had. So that's something for you guys, for us all to chew on, and we can discuss that later, but it's like the optimism around the skills leveling is definitely there, yet we're still seeing this divide. And actually, there might be an even more smaller group that will benefit and will take a leap and will actually have that in the conservation of resources theory, having that buildup of more and more resources. So we actually might be looking at an even more mean, nasty divide coming up. Anyway, I was an optimist. I am going a little bit to the pessimistic thing, but there's a clear message that's also coming through. So our research now shows that mainly people are focusing on how are we using it? Oh, how can I write a good prompt? But there's a lot more, and I think that came true in both talks that from Nicole and Minna, is you need to learn why you're using it, how you're using it, how it works, what sits behind it, because there are these biases that are going on. And again, that BCG study showed that if they were using the tool for tasks that it wasn't made for, their performance went down, which is that overtrust issue. So it's really important to understand what we are doing, and then I kind of summarized that as it's about skills, but it's about this generic competence. And there's some future news, like we were dialing into the internet in the 90s like this. Everybody that has siblings remembers it. Get off the phone, please. There's a rapid adoption. We're still in early stages. So how I was using this watch as a kid, my cousins are now using, and my nieces and nephews are now using this watch. And of course, we now have ChatGPT flooding it, but there are on the horizon the ethical AI, the explainable AI, and collaborative AI. And on that last point, there's one thing I'm all going to get out of your systems. This is a conference about digital society. We needed to have this picture, the fingers touching. I learned from my colleagues at CSIRO, it's not a conference about digital and robot collaboration if you don't have this picture. So you're very welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Eva. I think we'll jump straight onto my talk, and so save your questions for Eva for just after my talk. Okay, so we've seen a trust perspective and a skills perspective and a broader look at this question of human-technology interactions. And I want to talk really about work design as another lens, and we've had it mentioned a couple times already today. The first point is that, you know, there is a lot of conversation about will there be any jobs, but the real question, I think, as work scholars that we're focusing on is not will there be any work, but what will that work be like? So it's not so much whole jobs that are being replaced by AI and technology, it's the tasks within jobs, and I think Bob made that point earlier today. And that means more and more work is about humans collaborating, working with technology. So that really gives rise to this question of work design. And that is the lens that I will focus on today. Let me give you a boring academic definition of what that is. First, work design is about the content and the organising of the tasks and the activities and the relationships that we have within our jobs or within a set of jobs, like a team, for example. In the field of work design, we tend to focus on key work characteristics. So these are aspects of work that we know from research matter for human beings. And I'm going to just share with you in 1 minute a model of work design that I've been developing, and it's really a synthesis of more than 100 years of research on this topic. What these are, these aspects of work design that I'm going to show you, they are aspects of work that we know from this 100 years of research are psychologically important for people. So influence their sense of meaning, their motivation, their learning, their growth, etc., and creating a lack of stress. So the first group of work characteristics is stimulating, and that's about the importance of having work where you have some variety, where you use different skills, where you've got a little bit of challenge in your work. I'm going to go through this very quickly. The second category, you can do a little mental check whether your jobs have these components as we go. The second category is mastery. And this is about the importance of going to work and actually knowing what it is you're meant to be doing. So having some clarity about your goals, your responsibilities, getting some feedback on your performance. The third one is what I call agency. I used to call, well, let me share a story with you. I got invited to this session. I come from Perth. Very wealthy mining magnate was giving away some money. So all the professors, you know, have to gather and be nice to these people. And honestly, the only time I got excited with anything that this person said was when he started talking about autonomy. And I was like, thank goodness we agree on something. This is great. And then as he continued to talk, I realised I'm thinking about human autonomy. He's all excited about machine autonomy. And so what this set of characteristics is about autonomy, but I call it agency, just to make clear. I'm talking about human agency. So we're talking about autonomy in your work, control over your work, influence, voice in your work. R is for relational. I think we all learnt this during COVID, the importance of work where you can connect and belong and be part of something bigger than yourself. And then T is about, I think everybody understands this one too, is about the importance of having demands in your work that are tolerable. So levels of pressure that are reasonable, that you can cope with, that do not overwhelm your resources. And this is the very simple model called SMART. So the lens that I approach technology through in my work is to say, we know these things are really important for human psychology, for meaning and motivation and learning, etc. What is the impact of technology on these things? And I'm just going to talk about stimulating and tolerable. I don't have time to do them all. Now, of course, all of technology creates great opportunities for stimulating work. And I've forgotten what slide. Yes, so, you know, Toby Walsh, I'm not sure if he's here, but yes, hi Toby. You know, you talk about how the dull, dirty and dangerous tasks will be replaced. And generally we see this upskilling of the workforce. But what we also know is that technology can actually also create really passive, monitoring, boring jobs. Just as one simple example, this is an Uber Eats deliverer talking about just how boring the work is because he has to spend so much time waiting for the technology to tell him where to get the next pizza from or whatever. Just to give a couple of examples, we've been doing some research on a company implementing automated train driving. And in this company, the train drivers, and there's more than 500 train drivers in this company, they still need the train drivers because the technology is not perfectly reliable. So you have to keep the train drivers there just in case the trains break down. But they don't break down very often. So these people sit around and don't do very much, very interesting. They actually talked about themselves as being like koala bears prior to automation, as in rare and special. But now they see themselves as Band-Aids. So they say we're the Band-Aid until the techies get there to fix things. Originally, train drivers were up there with airline pilots and one of those careers everyone aspired to, but we're just forgotten we're the Band-Aid. So that's one example. Another study, this is looking at robot use in surgery. This is a scrub nurse talking about how with this new technology, their roles changed. And she said, really we had nothing to do. We were only allowed to make the instrument table ready at the beginning of the surgery and then clean up the whole mess. And we really didn't have a role in between. So what you see there is that stimulating work that human beings need is eroded. Let's go now to the other end of the spectrum. So let's go to the T, the tolerable part of work. And there's been hints of this already today. Amazon fulfillment centres all around the world have had big issues with terrible work conditions. And part of it is because the technology monitors on people's risks, that monitor how quickly people move and so on, is used to intensify the work. And people talk about this idea, that, you're, either going to be replaced by a robot or treated like one. And that's the real two options. We see, for example, huge growth in worker surveillance. During COVID, the sales of technology to survey people at work escalated dramatically. We did a study looking at the concept of algorithmic management. So this is when, instead of a human manager assigning tasks, scheduling the work, giving feedback, it's all done through algorithms. And I guess Uber drivers are a classic example. They have algorithms assigning the work, not human managers. We reviewed more than 40 studies of algorithmic management and found that overall work became more intense when algorithmic management was introduced. In other words, people just have more intolerable demands. They have to work harder, and agency control went down on average across these 40 studies. So what can we do, though? And I think, like others, I'm pessimistic but also keen to try to change the situation. I mentioned before a study where the nurses felt they didn't have a role. I mentioned it deliberately because in this same study, what they showed was that just by accident, really, thank you, one of the surgeons asked one of the nurses to jump up and intervene. It turned out the nurse was brilliant at doing this, so they redesigned the work actually to create a better role for the nurses in this robotic surgery. And in fact, their roles became even better and more interesting and more challenging than pre the introduction of that technology. But I mention that because it was an accident, really. And my point is we should be trying to use technology to create better work, not just accidentally fix it up post hoc. So what we need to do is we need to move away from this very technocentric perspective where we focus on the technology to have what we call a socio-technical approach. So just as an example, the Australia's digital economy strategy for 2030, 91.7% of the investment is going into the technical side and less than 10% on the human side. And most of that human investment is on acquiring digital skills. So there's not much investment in these sorts of issues. And my last point, I think, is that we need to move from being reactive to being more proactive and shaping the way that technology plays out and is used in the workplace. And there was a select committee on the future of work, and they said, hope is not a strategy. And I really like that quote, that it is not a strategy, but we do need more of a strategy in this area. So just to conclude with the words of John Homer Shah, which I really love, this goes back to Dirk's comment about creating, I guess. The future is not some place we're going to, but one we're creating, and the paths are not to be found, but made. And I guess I think all of us in the room share that desire to make a better future. So thank you very much. So let's go straight to questions. While I get organised, have we got some questions? Questions for Eva? Yes, thank you. Jump in, please.
Sorry, my question isn't really for Eva.
Okay,
but
anyone is fine.
It's probably a question for the whole panel in a way, because it's been so interesting. But I can't help but sit here and think about my own experience of what AI means to me as a discipline lead in a university.
Yeah.
And the thing that comes across my desk the most is distrust. And the distrust is distrust that students are using AI inappropriately, that even our casual staff are using AI. Did that person really mark that essay? Did that person really write that essay? And even to the point of people talking about the idea that the long-form essay is over and that we won't be able to trust people to write an essay themselves anymore, and we have to there now convert to all these different forms of assessment. And I kind of think, does it have to be that way? How could we do things differently so that we are much more embracing of the potential for people to be enhancing their productivity in the way that we've been talking about today, without necessarily being swept into this, ongoing hysteria and distrust? I'm just interested.
I'd love to get some other comments from the panel, but to me that's a little bit the point I was trying to make about being more proactive. I mean, the fact that this technology has been around, it's been around for a long time. So, we sort of knew this was all going to happen, but we're reacting now in a sort of knee-jerk reaction. I think we could be being more proactive. So to me, it's a sort of, your question is symbolic of a broader issue. We're not investing enough in proactively thinking about these more social science sorts of issues. But love to get other thoughts from the panel.
Yeah, Tamara Sharon from Radboud University has worked on a concept. It's called sphere transgressions. Digital is transgressing all kinds of spheres, education, health. And we are kind of witnessing that sphere transgression in education. And what happens when the digital comes in, it says we need to reconfigure what we're doing. Of course, there's also a sense of loss, because I think many of the things that we do in education have been really good. But now this kind of forces us to do things differently, because the whole idea of writing is changing. There will be students for whom writing and thinking have nothing in common. They are writing with ChatGPT and they are reading with ChatGPT. So I think then it becomes like, okay, so what can we teach us? We need to teach them somehow to connect the dots between these pieces of text, and I have already like tried all kinds of things. I ask ChatGPT to write the essay, and then I tell students what's wrong with it. So basically, take these things on board and experiment with them and with the students. So I think they will be using them. So somehow we just have to come to grips with it. And I think we are intelligent people. We will be able to do it, but it's just like painful in the beginning.
I mean, I'm deeply troubled by this too, because I think we don't want to lose these remarkable skills that we have as humans, and they take a long time to develop, and it's so easy for the next generation to go, well, why do I need to do that? This machine can do it for me. So I think the critical approach is helping students to critically evaluate these technologies. I also think authentic assessments that, and changing the nature of the assessments can also play a role in this. So I think in some ways, it can be a helpful prod for us to think innovatively and creatively and critically about our own assessments. And, we all rely on these long essays, should we? Or should that just be one form? I think the knee-jerk reaction that I've seen, is pulling everyone back to write them all by hand. And that's really, really problematic when there's a whole generation of students that are grown up with computers and they can't write for 3 hours, right? So it's actually, and could you write a paper without the use of a computer anymore? So it's actually really problematic at so many levels. But I think taking the helpful prompt, but also pushing back as well.
We can take a question.
Okay, we have another question at the back. Thank you.
Sharon, I was struck by your second last PowerPoint slide, which talked about the need for a socio-technical systems approach, which, as you know, goes back to a West Australian son of a shearer, Fred
Emery,
Emery,
yes.
who, along with Oscar Urza, at University of Melbourne came up with this concept when they were seeking out in the 1950s to get farmers to use technology and to use it in a certain way that would enhance not just the production of agriculture, but engage the individuals. And I'm wondering, is it a cultural problem that the concept has been used very much in the Nordic system and among the Dutch, who have kind of given it a new lease of life in recent times, and yet in the Anglo-Saxon world we seem to ignore it, and yet you're calling for it again, which I totally endorse. So what's the problem?
Yeah, sort of the spread of, why, and, there's a nice article David Guest wrote in Human Relations about why did socio-technical systems ideas not spread? And for those not familiar with it, one of the consequences of that theory was something called self-managing teams, which is a way of people working in organisations in a team with autonomy instead of very traditional hierarchical sorts of models. But the idea of socio-technical systems theory is you don't just optimise the technology, which is really the technocentric approach, but you optimise the social and you do it jointly at the same time. And so it's a very simple, but I think very powerful idea. Why is it not spreading? I think it is, comes back to some of those broader institutional national forces that have, and Greg could talk about this probably far more eloquently than me, but that have, have meant that workers do not have a lot of power. The lack of unions, who is it that buys and purchases technology in organisations? It's chief executives, it's the IT people. They do it for performance and productivity and control. They don't look at our universities. They don't do it to make our work better. So, we haven't got enough forces pushing against that. And, we were going to talk a little bit about regulation, and this could be a good opportunity. Regulation can play a role in that, but it's just like with health and safety regulation. Health and safety regulation and it's changed recently to get more focus on mental health at work, and that is pushing some change, but it's not enough because you still got to look at upskilling the managers and the leaders, and you still got to look at it at the organisational level to say, how can we actually implement these ideas to managers and things who are not trained in that? And it's the same with socio-technical. Managers are not getting trained in our business schools and so on to think like this. So it's a great question, and it's, I think many of the people in this audience with their broader mindsets and focuses could really help address that question too, I think. Thank you. Any other comments from anyone?
No, I think building on that, it's also, and that's a point that you always make as well, Sharon, is that who is designing this technology? It's not the social scientists that are coming up with the algorithms typically. So, for example, what I talked about, the research on the skills-based analysis and automating that and using data from SAP and the likes, those tech companies are out there. They're started by economists, by computer scientists. So when I look at that with my educational training, it drives me berserk, because how could you even think of capturing something complex as a competence with that type of data? But they have a different background, they have different training, and that you see that in the technology. And there's many examples that go back way before that. The group of technology designers designs a technology that works for them, that fits their narrative, that fits their perspective and their philosophical framework. It doesn't, it's something about all the social networks and being drawn to people that are alike. And so I could go on a tangent about this, but who designs the technology and their background? You see that in the technology.
That's such a great point. And Nicole, you jump in, and this will be your last word. So think about what you want to say, and then Minna, you can have your last word as well.
I just think on that topic, I do think that best practice in this area is when designing sort of AI or any sort of advanced technology, it's collaborative and it's interdisciplinary. So it goes back to that point about human involvement, but that's diverse input, and that comes through very, very strongly in our analysis of successful cases of AI implementation in public sector work. It's always co-designed with interdisciplinary input.
Minna.
Yeah, I think this has been a great panel, because I think we are basically very like-minded, and what I would like to leave you with is how under-resourced everything that has to do with human and society is in terms of tech. How much money and effort goes into promoting tech, and how little effort goes into promoting our perspectives. We are constantly, like I'm constantly in panels with tech developers, and after the panels everybody say, oh, your perspectives are so fresh and interesting. That's not what I want to hear. I want to hear that this is something that is there and has been for decades for us to pay attention to. So I think Sharon's work really beautifully shows how we could do this well. We could reconfigure the way we think about work, but what we end up seeing is AI implementations where the human aspects are not taken into account. We look at failed projects constantly. We look at cancelled projects, millions and millions of euros that go into waste.
Thank you, Minna. I think that's a beautiful way to end, because our next session will be about the role of social science in this topic, and I think we should be thinking about, how do we get more investment into this topic? But thank you all very much for the excellent questions and panel.